The number was 1872, not the year, the number of sites. That hit me before the scale of what was missing did. 1,872 archaeological sites, catalogued across 4 continents, sharing the same architectural geometry, the same drainage engineering, the same cardinal alignment, and no shared civilization to explain them. No trade routes connecting them. No common language recorded. No empire named in any textbook I ever read. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 2,000 places, separated by oceans and centuries, built to the same proportional specifications. And the story we've been handed says they emerged independently, by coincidence, by what scholars politely call convergent cultural development. That phrase does a lot of heavy lifting. It explains everything while explaining nothing. And once you sit with the mathematics of it, truly sit with it, that explanation starts to feel less like scholarship and more like a door quietly closed. I found this while researching something else entirely. A paper on pre-Columbian soil chemistry in the Amazon basin. A footnote. 3 lines about a 2003 survey conducted by a joint Brazilian-German research team that was quietly defunded 18 months after it began. The lead researcher, a geologist named Dr. Heike Maurer, gave one interview to a regional academic journal in Bonn and then, as far as the published record is concerned, stopped talking. Her findings suggested that the dark, impossibly fertile soil stretching across hundreds of kilometers of the Amazon, what locals call terra preta, wasn't accidental. It was manufactured, at industrial scale, across a region the size of France. That footnote sent me down a path I haven't fully returned from. The official story goes like this. Human civilization developed in isolated pockets. The great river valleys, the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River, each independently discovered agriculture, developed writing, built cities, and organized governance roughly between 5000 and 3000 BCE. The Americas developed separately later along parallel but unconnected lines. The monuments we cannot explain, Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca Lines, the megalithic structures of Malta, the underwater ruins off the coast of Yonaguni, are either regional anomalies, misidentified natural formations, or the products of local ingenuity we simply haven't fully decoded yet. This is not a fringe position. It is the consensus of generations of dedicated, rigorous archaeologists and historians who have devoted their careers to understanding the human past. Their work matters. The evidence they've assembled is vast, meticulous, and genuinely impressive. I want to be fair to the official narrative because it deserves fairness before it faces scrutiny. The mainstream framework has solved real problems, corrected real errors, and moved our understanding forward in real and measurable ways. But let me show you where the map runs out. Let's start with the numbers. In 1998, satellite imaging technology reached a resolution threshold that allowed archaeologists to see beneath jungle canopy for the first time with meaningful precision. Within a decade, the LiDAR surveys light detection and ranging, a laser mapping technique that strips away vegetation digitally and reveals what's underneath, had rewritten the population estimates for pre-Columbian Central America by a factor of 10. Where we thought hundreds of thousands of people lived in scattered villages, we found evidence for millions living in vast, interconnected urban networks. Cities, with causeways, with reservoirs, with zoning. The timeline isn't subtle. In 2010, a LiDAR survey of the Cambodian jungle around Angkor Wat revealed that the medieval city wasn't a temple complex surrounded by modest settlements. It was the center of what may have been the largest pre-industrial urban sprawl on Earth, stretching across at least 1,000 square kilometers, with hydraulic infrastructure so sophisticated that modern civil engineers have described it as ahead of its time by centuries. A civilization of potentially 1 million people, hidden under a forest, invisible to conventional archaeology for 100 years of study. In 2018, a similar survey over the Guatemalan jungle produced 61,480 individual ancient structures in a single season. 61,000 structures. The archaeologists who published in Science that February called it a game changer, a polite phrase for everything we thought we knew was wrong. Speaking of what was buried, there's a pattern in how this knowledge was buried that I find harder to dismiss than the sites themselves. Which brings me to the libraries. Most people know about the burning of the Library of Alexandria. It's one of history's most lamented tragedies, the loss of an estimated 400,000 scrolls representing centuries of accumulated human knowledge. What most people don't know is that the destruction wasn't a single dramatic fire. It was a process, gradual, political, and suspiciously selective. The Serapeum, the daughter library, was destroyed in 391 CE under the decree of Emperor Theodosius. The mathematician Hypatia was murdered in 415 CE. The library didn't burn. It was slowly, methodically emptied. But here's what matters. Alexandria wasn't unique. It was part of a network. The Imperial Library of Constantinople, established in 357 CE, once held an estimated 120,000 volumes. It survived for over 1,000 years. When Crusaders sacked the city in 1204, Christian soldiers attacking a Christian city, which is its own remarkable historical question, the library was looted and largely destroyed. What remained was finished by the Ottoman conquest of 1453. Gone. The Nalanda Library Complex in Bihar, India, at its height possibly the largest repository of knowledge in the medieval world, housing perhaps 9 million manuscripts, was burned by the forces of Bakhtiyar Khilji in 1193 CE. Accounts from contemporary observers describe the burning as lasting for months. Months, because there was so much to burn. And then there are the Mayan codices, of the thousands of books the Maya produced. A civilization that independently developed zero, tracked celestial cycles with extraordinary precision, and maintained historical records spanning centuries. Exactly for survive. For the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the Grolier Codex, which spent decades disputed as a forgery before finally being authenticated in 2016. Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the burning of the rest in July 1562, in the town of Mani, in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. He later expressed some regret about the scale of what he'd done. He described it as destroying works in which the devil's lies and superstitions were recorded. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe a 16th century bishop was simply doing what he believed God demanded. But the pattern, the repeated, multi-generational, cross-cultural destruction of recorded knowledge, the pattern is almost theatrical in its consistency. Libraries don't just burn. Specific libraries burn. Specific records disappear. The timing, again and again, correlates with the consolidation of new power structures that needed the past to begin somewhere convenient. I spent weeks trying to understand the measurements. Not metaphorically, literally, the units of measurement used by ancient civilizations separated by thousands of miles of ocean. In the early 1980s, Scottish engineer Alexander Thom published a meticulous statistical analysis of megalithic sites across the British Isles and found evidence for a standardized unit of measurement he called the megalithic yard, 2.72 feet, or approximately 82.9 centimeters, used with extraordinary consistency across hundreds of sites spanning thousands of years. His methodology was sound enough that it was published in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society. His conclusions were contested vigorously, but the math held. Here's where it gets strange. The same basic unit, or its near-identical harmonic equivalent, appears in the architectural ratios of the Indus Valley Civilization city planning at Mohenjo-Daro. It appears in the proportional relationships between elements of the Giza Plateau. It appears in the spacing of the stone alignments at Karnak in Brittany, where over 3,000 standing stones march across the French countryside in geometrically precise rows that have never been fully explained. That's not coincidence. That's either connection or it's something more uncomfortable. Evidence that the human capacity for precision measurement emerged far earlier and far more universally than the standard timeline suggests. The part that keeps me up at night is what a standardized global unit of measurement actually implies. You don't develop the same ruler by accident across 3 continents. You either inherit it from a common source or you receive it through contact, or there is some third explanation that our current framework doesn't have a comfortable category for. Let me be fair to the official narrative here, because this is the point where serious historians push back, and they're not wrong to. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We see faces in clouds and conspiracies in coincidences. The fact that multiple civilizations arrived at similar architectural ratios could reflect universal mathematical truths that any sufficiently sophisticated culture will eventually discover. The golden ratio appears in seashells, not because mollusks attended the same university, but because geometry is geometry. Convergent development is real. Parallel innovation is documented. The independent invention of writing in Mesopotamia, China, and Mesoamerica is a matter of scholarly consensus with substantial evidence. These are fair points. I hold them seriously. But here's what the convergence argument cannot explain: the specificity of the anomalies. Not the broad strokes of pyramid building or astronomical observation. Those could plausibly converge. The details. The 52-year Venus cycle tracked with identical precision by the Maya and by cultures in ancient Egypt and ancient India. The same myth, a great flood, a divine warning, a single family preserved, a new world emerging, appearing in over 200 distinct cultural traditions across every inhabited continent, with consistent structural details that go far beyond the shared human experience of rainfall. The fact that the oldest known temple on Earth, Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, was deliberately buried by its own builders approximately 10,000 years ago, covered, entombed, sealed, in what archaeologists have called intentional backfilling, with no explanation for why a functioning sacred site would be hidden by the people who used it. Maybe they had reasons we can't recover. Maybe the backfilling was ritual, not concealment. Maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist. But there is a class of archaeological sites that share one specific, remarkable characteristic. They exist at the intersection of multiple ley lines, straight alignments connecting ancient monuments across vast distances, while also sitting on significant underground water sources or specific geomagnetic anomalies. Glastonbury in England, the Externstein Rock Formation in Germany, Sedona in Arizona, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the temples of Angkor, Mount Kailash in Tibet, which no archaeologist has been permitted to formally survey, and which 4 of the world's major religions regard as cosmically significant without having coordinated that regard with each other. I don't have answers, only patterns. The pattern suggests that whoever built across the span of human history, whether one civilization or many acting from shared knowledge, they were choosing locations based on criteria we have not formally cataloged. They were reading something in the landscape, and we have forgotten how to read it too. The archive still exists in pieces. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo holds papyri that haven't been translated and published. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, opened to limited scholarly access only in 1881, expanded gradually, still partially restricted, contains documents from the 12th century forward, including correspondence from every major political upheaval of the medieval world. The archives of the East India Company, now held at the British Library, document the systematic dismantling of pre-existing record-keeping systems across the Indian subcontinent during the colonial period. Scholars have noted that the company's own administrators sometimes expressed surprise at the sophistication of the administrative and historical records they were replacing. Sitting in a filing cabinet in the basement of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History is a collection of artifacts removed from burial mounds across the Ohio and Mississippi valleys in the 1800s and early 1900s, some of which, according to internal correspondence from that era now digitized and accessible through the Smithsonian's own archive portal, were described by field researchers as anomalous in ways that didn't fit the prevailing model of pre-Columbian North American culture. Those internal letters use words like unexpected and difficult to classify. The artifacts themselves are cataloged. Most have not been the subject of published studies. The pattern of restriction isn't total. The selective restriction in any domain tells you something about what someone believed was worth restricting. Maybe it's this: Maybe the civilization we're looking for wasn't a single empire with a flag and a capital city. Maybe it was something more like a shared operating system, a body of knowledge about mathematics, astronomy, acoustics, agriculture, and something we might call sacred geography that was distributed across cultures the way a language family distributes across nations. Related, recognizable, varied in expression but unified in structure. Maybe it was destroyed not by a single catastrophe but by many, the Ice Age terminus event approximately 12,800 years ago that triggered a global flood pulse and ended dozens of megafaunal species, followed by centuries of slow rebuilding in which knowledge was the first casualty, not monuments. Monuments last. Knowledge doesn't, without the institutions to carry it. Maybe the myths of a golden age, preserved across cultures that could not have borrowed them from each other, are not metaphors. Maybe they're archives, the oldest kind, the kind stored in stories because stories survive when libraries burn. And maybe the reason this remains speculative, remains in footnotes, remains the subject of YouTube documentaries rather than university curricula, is not because the evidence is thin. It's because the evidence changes something fundamental about the story we tell about ourselves, about how long we've been here, about how much we've lost, about how recently. I keep returning to Dr. Mauer's footnote, the defunded survey, the single interview, the silence after. I reached out to the journal that published her work. They confirmed the paper exists. They confirmed she was affiliated with the University of Freiburg at the time. Beyond that, they couldn't help me. Her university email no longer resolves. Her name appears in no subsequent publications. That might mean nothing. Researchers change careers. People burn out. Science is full of interesting ideas that didn't pan out. But the terra preta is still there, stretching across hundreds of kilometers of Amazonian soil, still impossibly fertile, still chemically distinct from any surrounding soil in ways that indicate not natural processes, but deliberate biological engineering at a scale we have no cultural memory of achieving. Someone made that soil for a civilization we haven't named. And then the civilization disappeared and the soil remained, and eventually we built our current understanding of human history right on top of it, without looking down. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I don't know what was erased or when or by whom or with what intention. I don't have answers, only patterns. And the patterns suggest that the history we inherited is not the history that happened. It's the history that survived, which is a very different thing. The question worth asking isn't what we've discovered. It's what we haven't been allowed to find yet. That answer might already be sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, sealed until a date no one has publicly disclosed, waiting for a footnote that sends the next person down the same path. I hope they follow it.